Listening to Mother Earth. So we talk about this in all kinds of different ways, different directions, but and I think what I'd like to do is talk about it from several different directions and see where that goes. There are those who say that this pandemic is sort of a wake-up call from Mother Earth. I've heard, we have a Native American friend who, that's his perspective, and that we have the opportunity to pay attention now, or next wake-up call will be a little more forceful. But we've had wake-up calls for a while. It's really just been in the last 100 years that, or less, that humanity has had the capacity to actually just end our existence, to destroy our existence. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that, but there's lots of possibilities for doing that. I mean, pandemic as this is, or much worse, it's a possibility, nuclear war, species extinction, climate warming, poisoning of our earth and water, poisoning of our food supply. I mean, there's lots of possibilities, right? Any one of which would be sufficient. So as I was thinking about that, I was wondering, well, how do we get here? What assumptions did we make during our, actually fairly recent evolution, say the last couple thousand years, that brought us to this point where, people acting out of, relative intelligence, brought us to this point. And this pandemic, isn't the first sort of warning. I remember the first time I sort of heard something that registered. Well, besides, hiding under the desks in grade school, that was, anybody did that. And that seemed like a total disaster, all this metal and wood flying around. But that was the best plan we came up with at that time. But other than that, the first thing that actually caught my attention was Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. That was 60 years ago, late 1950s, warning about the use of pesticides, DDT in particular at that time, which they've more or less outlawed because they've come up with much better pesticides, much more insidious ones, ones that are actually incorporated into the plants themselves. But here it is 60 years later, at the time it was sort of brushed off by most people, argued against, swept under the rug. 60 years later, one of the things that we've noticed being here for 11 years now was when we first moved here, there was just an immensity of insect life. I mean, if you had your back porch light on at night, it was a menagerie out there. I mean, there was everything. If you drove home on a summer night from Tazewell, you'd be, spend 10 minutes cleaning your windshield the next morning. That doesn't happen anymore. And there's consequences to that. I mean, people might say, well, that's great. I can sit out on my porch and not be annoyed by insects. But, there's a lot of things that depend on that. Frogs and birds and fish and lots of things. And how that's all interconnected and how that all, supports our existence on this planet. We notice only the ones that are most useful to us, like honeybees. We care about that. All those other insect species that are going extinct, that others, plants and animals and fish and birds might depend on, we don't notice that so much. A few less songbirds, more or less, even 60, 70%. Well, it doesn't affect most of us unless we happen to care about that diversity, care about what that sort of web of life actually means. We've known about climate change for how long? 40 years? Done very little about it. Still arguing whether it's even real or not. We've had this huge growth in diseases that are where environment plays a big factor. Environment, diet, things like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, rare diseases 100 years ago. Almost unheard of. Alzheimer's, So you have to wonder, what's underlying that? It's not like it appeared from one day to the next. It's not like our DNA changed in 2 or 3 generations. So you have to wonder, what has changed? And you come back to the same things, poison our food supply, poison our air, poison our water. Eat foods with a tolerable amount of pesticides, not. I remember I used to live in Massachusetts, and one year, just before Thanksgiving, like in October, there was this headlines in the page, oh my God, in cranberries they found pesticides. And they were calling them cancer berries, and nobody bought them that year for Thanksgiving, and it was a huge thing, right? How do people feel about it now? Like, yeah, okay, some pesticides, but I'm sure it's okay, not too much. So it's quite extraordinary what we can get used to, when the goalposts just change a little bit year to year, what we can tolerate. So anyway, we're all pretty well aware of that. Those issues. What I was curious about is, how did we get here? What beliefs did we have as a species that ended up where we would put our very existence at so much risk? How did that happen? And there's probably lots of different pathways you could follow there, but I just picked out a few, and I apologize for being a little scientific-y here, but one was, we've all heard of Louis Pasteur, right? Germ theory, everybody. How about Antoine Béchamp? Anybody? Okay, they were French contemporary scientists. Louis Pasteur came up with the germ theory. Basically, there's germs around, and if you catch them, you get sick. The idea is kill the germs. I mean, and that was really helpful. Before that, they didn't know anything about, why people were getting sick. So Antoine Béchamp was a scientist, French scientist, same era. And he had a totally different theory. His theory is called the terrain theory now. And it was basically, if the body's healthy, it's resistant to disease. If it's unhealthy, there are organisms of opportunity that will populate the body, and those are called germs. The germs are the result, not the cause. So it's quite different. One is, there's some self-responsibility involved. There's taking care of the body, honoring the body. The other one is, there's some alien organisms out there that are not really me, and but if I catch them, the doctors know what to do to kill them off. And it works to a certain extent. I mean, that's what antibiotics are really about. Anti-life. We'll kill the organisms. Of course, quite a few of our own beneficial bacteria will get killed along the way, but it's useful to note that the antibiotics don't actually cure us, right? All they do is stem the tide long enough for the body to heal itself. It's the body that does the healing. I mean, if it was the antibiotics that did the healing, we'd just keep taking them for the rest of our life, right? Just to get more and more healthy. But it's basically just to, if things have gotten so out of hand that disease is raging, it's really helpful to have something to sort of get things back to zero, and then hopefully the body will have enough strength to recover from that. I mean, chemotherapy is the same sort of concept. We'll kill the cancer. Of course, we'll kill a lot of things also, but hopefully there'll be enough strength left to recover. So all of that type of thinking about illness and medicine and, our body's relationship to the outside world, it, has, as a result of this germ theory, there's a bit of antagonism there. I mean, can you feel that? Like there's these alien things out there that are, going to get me. And if they succeed in invading my body, hopefully the doctors will kill them at that point. I mean, that's what, our treatment for cancer is essentially that: either cut it out or kill it with radiation or chemicals. I mean, that's what we've got. But, all of us have cancer cells in our body, and by and large, the body's able to deal with that. So the question is really, even if you're able to, kill or cut out the cancer, the question remains, well, what imbalance caused that to arise to begin with? If we don't address that, then, we're not looking really at the cause. We're just sort of, if things get far enough out of balance, we can take some radical action. Sort of like, if it's a automotive analogy, it's like the mechanic saying, well, don't waste your time putting oil in your car. Just when it breaks down, bring it in. We'll take care of it. As long as it's not too broken, we can put it back together. Not a problem. But this terrain theory is quite different. It's like, it turns it around, like how is there respect for this body? Is there appreciation for this body? What do I need to do to take care of this body? It's a different sense, right? And they're finding out, one of the interesting areas of research over the last, couple of decades or so is just what's happening in our own intestinal tract. We're finding out that there's literally 10 times as many bacterial cells in our intestine as there are human cells in our body. And they not only have a function with digestion, they have a function with, have a big part to play in our body's immunity, propagation of things affecting our mental health and sense of well-being. So that it does many things other than just simply digest food, which would be pretty amazing in itself, sorting out from whatever we put in our mouth to deal with it. Like, oh my God, what's he doing today? But then having to deal with it, right? Sort it out. Okay, that's out, this is in. So if we have 10 times as many bacterial cells as human cells, it sort of raises the question is, who's working for who? You could say that, from the bacterial cells perspective, you're like, here we are sort of in this damp, dark place, and, we have to deal with whatever's coming down the chute, and, life is tough, and, there that person is walking around just free as a bird. On the other hand, we could look at it as these humans running around working 40, 50, 60 hours a week so that they can go shopping to buy food to feed all of these little cells in our body, right? And the cells are thinking, yeah, we've got this under control here. But it's a quite a different way of looking at our bodies, looking at illness, looking at how this body feels in the world. It's true even in this day of pandemics. We hear all about, hoping, hopefully soon that there'll be a vaccine, a cure, something, some chemical substance that'll make this all go away. But what you don't actually hear much about at all is, what we can do in the meantime to take care of the body so that if it is exposed, that it'll respond well. It's pretty obvious, right? It's there's clear evidence that most of the people that actually die from this have an underlying health problem to begin with. So, wouldn't it make sense to think, well, if I make the body more healthy so there's not an underlying health problem, But most people don't feel like that. It's feel like, okay, I'll do what I can, and maybe I'll be walking down the street one day and catch this thing. So it's sort of out of our hands, something in a distance, and then maybe the medical community will step in and make it all better. So it's quite a different perspective on, how we look at our body, how we look at, the whole medical system, how we think about illness, what our level of comfort is in being in the world. All right. So this is one avenue where, the reason that we haven't heard about this Antoine Béchamp is that his theory didn't win, right? History's written by the winners. So that was the germ theory. It's the basis of Western medicine. But it's two quite different approaches to the body. Okay, and another track that I was thinking of in the Middle Ages. It's not true that the Catholic Church prohibited dissection of dead people, but they controlled it because they didn't want to lose control over, how people treated a human body that had recently passed. But they did give permission to certain people for certain reasons, and but rarely, not often. And one of the people that they gave permission to was Leonardo da Vinci, and because he wanted to be able to dissect bodies to see how the body was really formed so he could sculpt and paint more accurately. So they gave him permission to do that. But they had a caveat. And the caveat was, we're okay with this as long as you stick to the physicality of it. Muscles, bones, tendons, all that skin, that's fine. You can, as long as what you're looking for is that's fine. If you're looking for soul, that's our business. Right? Spirit, just stick to the material, what can be measured, sensed. And that split has sort of been here ever since, right? So science is focused on, what can be measured, observed, replicated. Anything that can't be subject to that scientific method is, not scientific. Can't really be proven. So there's this bifurcation of the material world and whatever else, right? So consciousness is a bit of a problem, though. Which side is that on? The materialist sort of say, we don't want it on the other side because we know we're conscious, right? So we don't want to subscribe to anything, beyond our sphere of influence. So the assumption that grew out of that is that our brain produces consciousness. It's a function of brain cells, and it arises at birth, ends with death, and in the meantime, your brain produces it. No explanation of how that happens, right? I know it's in there somewhere, but when we really look at consciousness, we can sense that it's of a different dimension. And the reason I say that is because it is what looks at everything else. It's like we did at the beginning. We can notice, the physical sensations, our five senses. We can notice our thoughts. We can notice our feelings. We can sense into the internal energy of our body. But all of those things are within the field of consciousness. But what we can't do is step back and look at consciousness. Right? We can't do that because it is what's looking. There's nothing behind it, right? There's consciousness, and then there's everything else. So while the materialists want to claim consciousness, as a bodily function, for a long time they were really resistant to doing any research in it, actually, as a real thing. And for a long time, to be a psychiatrist or a neurochemist, even suggesting that your area of research was going to be consciousness was pretty much a career-ending statement. It was like, okay, wacko, not interested. So the material world doesn't quite know what to do with consciousness, so they have to ascribe it as a bodily function without proof. And so nobody even really questions it, even though we all experience like all the time. And then anything beyond the material world, soul, God, spirit, all of those things are, from the scientific viewpoint, unscientific, because you can't measure it. So the scientific community makes the rules about what is, scientific. And scientific has seemed to have gained the upper hand as being the final arbiter of what's true and what's not true. And then some people have beliefs about religion and spirituality. That's sort of a side activity. So this split that happened maybe 500 years ago has been perpetuated this way, by the principles of scientific thought, which are created by scientists, which are true. I mean, it's not that it's bad, but it's true within its own sphere. It produces results, but it misses sort of the essential part of life. Right? It doesn't have to account for that. There can be scientists that are fascinated with, all kinds of things, chemical weapons, biological weapons, really interesting scientifically. Morality takes a back seat. Okay, so that's another avenue. There's a third one I was thinking of that doesn't come to mind at the moment. Maybe it'll come later, but I'm sure there are many more, sort of belief systems that have arisen. Oh, I know what it is. So in the Bible, Genesis, Old Testament, whether you're Christian or not, there's a phrase that has impacted our relationship with nature. And the phrase is in the early section of Genesis, where they talk about the beginning of the world, etc. And the instructions go forth and multiply, be fruitful, and God grants dominion to mankind over, everything else. Animals, birds, fish, everything. To subject it to the will of mankind. So we took that one and ran with it, didn't we? I mean, it is true that, close to 3,000 years ago when that book of Genesis was probably written, the population was, maybe 1/400th of what it is now, and, multiplying and, eking a living out of nature was probably not particularly dangerous instruction, but what may be true at one point in time becomes problematic at another point. And so just the idea that humanity, one species out of several million, one species has the right to destroy nature for its own benefits. All right? And that's, we've sort of adopted that as an acceptable premise, like, if it's good for humans, that's what really counts. If there's some fallout and side effects and, a few 100,000 species die off of the planet, at least our life has gotten more comfortable. So, we extract things from the earth, we pump them into the air, we, put waste chemicals, into our rivers that have long since polluted the ocean, so we can't eat certain fish anymore because it'll, we've introduced genetic crops and pesticides, so farmers don't have to deal with weeds like they used to. That's a short-term solution because weeds are, the generations of weeds are a lot quicker than the generations of humans, so they're outgrowing the GMOs pretty quickly. But by that time, the consequences are already out in nature, and the solutions are stronger pesticides. So this question of dominion over all things, right? That's the word that gives power to that statement, and it's actually an old English word. An old Latin word. It's the same root as domain, like the domain of kings. It had a sense of property, sense of ownership. Same root for dominate. So this sense of somehow we as humans have this special right that's not, God-given, that's not, all those other species weren't entitled to that. I sort of wonder if God gave that same right to the dinosaurs when they were around, and then changed his mind, because they had dominion over all things at one time. Back when we were still little rodents running around trying not to get stepped on. And so these ideas, they have some value. That's why they're persistent, right? But when they're not seen within, the greater context, then they, as time goes on, they can get farther and farther afield. So what's been missing is just we've lost, as a species, not all of us, but as a species, we've lost this connection with nature. Right. It's almost, in some techie circles, it's almost seen as an advancement, like, when we can advance we can manufacture our own food, or we, maybe some cyborg version of ourselves in the future may not even need food, and that's somehow an advancement. But yeah, I don't think Mother Earth is going to let us get away with that. And it doesn't actually feel like we have all that much time left either to sort of reimagine what it is to be alive, to be human. It seems like all of these potentially disastrous forces are coming to a head, which were never possible before. It's just really in the last maybe 60, 70 years or so that's really become possible where extinction of humanity is actually a possibility. So, life would go on, some form. Maybe a few million years from now, maybe intelligent life will evolve again. But it would still be a loss, right? to have wasted this opportunity to come this far, this level of abilities for conceptual thinking, to have squandered it for what? More power for a small percentage of us, more wealth for a small percentage of us, more power for this country over that country, more profit for this company over that company, more short-term gain. So that's what we're giving it up for, right? So what is it about us as humans that allow us to move in that direction? To cause us to feel like, well, that's seems reasonable. Let's just keep going in that direction. And I would suggest that what it comes down to is this sense of being separate from life, being separate from the rest of the world, envisioning ourselves as this separate, everything else out there. And once we believe that, then it's sort of a slippery slope into thinking, well, why shouldn't I have more control, more power, more money, consume more? Why not? I've worked hard, I've earned it. If I can, dominate some other culture, some other race, some other country, some other religion, why not, But it stems from this fundamental belief that what I am is a separate person. And that, I'd suggest that belief, well, first of all, it's never questioned, right? Everybody just assumes that that's how things are. But what it's really based on is this whole package of beliefs about ourselves that have to do with, my story, my history, my beliefs, my hopes, my dreams, my fears, my regrets, my shames, my job, my career, my wealth, my family, where I live, my gender, all of that. That package of beliefs. But any one of those we can look at and see, well, there's not really, I might have this belief, or I might have this age, or I might have this job, but what I am is something that doesn't totally define what I am, right? Even if you put them all together, does it define what I am? Or is there a sense of, no, even if you took the whole storyline, all the facts and history and everything, put it all together, it still doesn't define what I am. So we can really look at, well, what is that sense of what I truly am? What is that sense of, I know all this information about myself, but what am I really? If I'm just sitting here, not doing much, nice day, at this moment, I don't have a job, I don't have a career, I don't have anything I have to think about particularly. Doesn't matter where I live, what I do. And yet we're still alive, we're still here, still present. So there's something about this life that exists beyond the facts, beyond what can be measured in quite scientific way. We can take our resume, we write down things, we can take pictures, we can record all that, keep a journal. And yet there's some sense, isn't there, of, in this present moment, there is a sense of aliveness, presence here. I may not have any idea what that is, but is there not a sense of that? Like, it's not based on any concept, not based on any religion, not based on what we've done or haven't done. But in this moment, there's a sense of simple aliveness. Nature's helpful that way. It sort of brings us back to that, because nature's not conceptual. Right? You walk in the woods and the tree doesn't have an attitude about you, doesn't have an opinion, doesn't say nasty things to you, doesn't get in your face. Well, you might walk into it, but it doesn't yell at you. It's just as it is, beautifully, silently living this life. The little plant being shaded out by the big plant isn't pissed off about it. It just finds itself there. Trees don't regret having their original seed dropped somewhere where, they're going to get beat up by the wind or the water. They just live life as it's presented to them, day after day. And so it's a reminder for us when we walk out into that silence, into that beauty as it just naturally evolves. It's a reminder of what we essentially are. And it's an opportunity when we're walking there to realize how much of our conceptual mind we bring to that situation. We walk down a path and there's this chatter happening, about what kind of bird it is. I've seen that tree before. I've seen a bigger tree than that. That's a dead tree. I like that bird. I don't like that one. So there's or kicks off some memory of some place. Oh, I remember sitting under an apple tree like that back in 1967. We go off on that for a while. So here in the midst of this immense silence, here it is, this mind just giving us this storyline that has nothing to do with, or almost nothing to do with what our experience actually is. So it's an opportunity, if we're paying attention, to realize how little control there really is over this thought process that's happening. And we can try to control it more, maybe even be slightly successful at that. But what actually really settles down that thought process is just realizing that it's not where we'll find ultimate truth. It's just not there. That we don't even need. We don't even need to awaken to realize that. That's just a logical conclusion if we're looking at it. Any thought in our mind is conceptual, only has reality in that moment in our own head, doesn't exist anywhere else, and it's impermanent, and it's at best just an opinion, a description, an analysis, a memory about something that's actually real. That's as good as it gets. So the mind is useful. Well, it's useful for a lot of practical things, but generally most of our mental energy is spent, just sort of churning around psychological things, memories, hopes, fears, dreams, just repetitive patterns when we really see it. And the difficulty is we can't make that stop. If we try to make it stop, we energize it, speeds it up. What we can do is just see that it's not where the, if it were a rainbow, it's not where the pot of gold is. It's just not there. It's not the right tool for experiencing the reality of existence that's all around us. Anybody ever feel like they were sort of living life in a bit of a bubble, like you were here and life was out there, and, trying to sort of integrate or connect or feel more alive, or, squeeze the juice out of life, or, that kind of sense, like, I just want to get some traction here. I want to really feel like I'm fully here. So the question is, what prevents that? I mean, what's holding us back from sort of feeling at home in our own skin, feeling at home in the world, living life without fear? That would be nice, huh? And I'd suggest it's all of these stories that we're telling ourselves in the head about how I should be, how life should be, how the other person should be, what I should do, what I shouldn't do, how life could be better if only. Without first realizing that when we really step back into our essence, life, as we were pointing to at the meditation this morning, it's just life, when we're really just relaxed back into our essence, life is good. Life has a sense of completeness about it, until our mind comes in and tells us something otherwise. I'll be happy when something happens, when something is different than now, right? So another way of saying that is, life is not satisfactory now, but if XYZ happens, then I'll feel good. So it's, even when we say that to ourselves, it's not so much that X, Y, and Z in themselves make us feel happy, but we believe that, if those things happen, then there's this sense of, within our own body, of sense of contentedness, right? Like, oh, okay, life is good. Okay. So the question is, why do you need X, Y, and Z in order to feel, oh, life is good? Right? I mean, only because we deny that possibility here now. We think there's a belief that somehow I need to do something different. I need to realize something. Something needs to change. I need to have a certain experience. I need to fix my karma. I need to do something, because certainly as is, I couldn't be qualified to feel completely okay. The problem is, the only time we ever have the opportunity to feel completely okay is always, of course, now. Right? But we're never okay with that. We're saying, well, maybe I feel pretty good now, but I could feel better if I get enlightened, right? Some concept down the road. I know that'll do it. I've heard it will. I'll deny it here, but I know if I don't know, maybe meditate another 10 years, then, or maybe, if I change my diet, if I, stop thinking all those unspiritual thoughts, whatever I believe needs to change is sufficient to postpone a sense of well-being in this moment. Right. So it's actually much more useful, rather than asking ourselves, well, how can I get enlightened? Right? How would you do that? The first thing you'd have to do is deny its presence now, because you'd have to do something to get somewhere in the future. That's the first thing you have to do. And since now is the only time you'll ever exist, ever, you've sort of postponed it indefinitely, based on a belief that what's here now isn't sufficient. Couldn't be. Not me, not with all my little quirks and flaws and inadequacies and past failures and things I'm not that proud about and things I haven't accomplished. So it's much more useful than asking the question, how can I get myself enlightened? It's much more useful to ask, what am I telling myself that's unenlightening me right now? That's useful. What story am I believing that's causing me to feel like there is lack in this moment? That we can do. That the brain can do. The brain is useful to tell us what's not true. And that's a useful practice. And I don't mean what's, sometimes true or relatively true. I mean what's, what am I believing that's not always true? Because that's what we're really trying to get at. What is our essence that doesn't come and go, isn't subject to this or that, isn't dependent on having a good experience or not. But what's essential to my nature? So by asking the question, what am I telling myself that is causing this sense of separation from me and the other person, separation from me and life, me and the natural world? What am I telling myself that creates that sense of separateness? I don't guess that a tree feels separate from life, or a deer, but humans do. So humans have this ability to think, which has some uses, obviously. But by thinking, it also has this sort of remarkable ability to sort of step out of itself and look back at itself, sort of self-evaluate ourselves, judge ourselves. But it's really just one thought judging, other thoughts. We just see it as a whole game happening within awareness. So a thought can easily be, well, I can't possibly just relax into my own existence because whatever comes after the word because is sufficient. To keep us removed from the rest of life. It doesn't take a lot. It actually only takes one belief. Life is pretty good, but I did this thing 25 years ago that I just can't get over. I'm just ashamed of myself, my behavior, and I'm basically condemned for the rest of my life. Just that one belief was sufficient. You could be fine, feel good about yourself otherwise, but just that one, whatever that one belief keeps coming up. Or I could have done this, or I didn't do that, or I missed that opportunity, whatever. I'm happy here, but not here. Things could be better. My partner could be better. Whatever my storyline, doesn't matter. A belief is sufficient. It's just the nature of the belief, right? Again, we're talking about a concept. Whatever the belief about whatever is just immensely less than the reality itself. It never is the complete story, right? It's never the story from all different angles, other people involved, what we don't see, what we don't understand, all of that. But as long as we hold that belief, it becomes the barrier. And it may be shocking to find out, again, we're not talking on a relative scale, but just from an ultimate scale, there may come a day when we are shocked to find out that there is no such thing as a true belief. A little shocking, but quite freeing, actually. When we understand that any concept is less than reality, any concept is an abstraction from reality. Every concept is a simplification of an immensely integrated existence. So any concept is just an abstraction, at least one whole order of magnitude removed from reality, maybe much more than that. So when we really see it, the reason it's freeing is because when we realize that, we don't waste our time looking to beliefs for any ultimate answers. So ultimately, this journey in this direction towards awakening to our true nature is, it's not that we lose our ability to think or do things, but we realize that all of that mental, psychological wheel spinning, there's no payoff there. It's not that we solve it. It's not that we resolve every problem. It's not that we undo what we did. It's just that we see that, at the time, I was acting to the level of my understanding, Sort of why they don't put kids in jail, because they don't quite know yet. And so the same for us, if we do something even as adults that we may later feel was really off base, but we can see, yeah, it was off base, but at the time, it was the best I could do. It's not a whitewash, but it's there's an understanding that that's how I learn. I make mistakes. Hopefully, we not repeat the same mistake too many times, and move on. So there's not We can let go of the self-blame and shame and all of that, and just recognize that this life is a journey into coming more and more into alignment with life itself. So we can really use the opportunity of nature just to allow it to inform us, allow it to teach us, give it that acknowledgement that it is, there's wisdom there. It's a more essential wisdom than our conceptual thoughts. But we've become so fascinated with our mind that we trust our thoughts more than the experience ourselves. So we believe it's more important to be able to name the tree than to actually experience the tree. It's more convenient to watch nature on the Nature Channel than actually walk in the woods. But this journey in that direction really has to do with our willingness to really question, really look. And I think this particular period where, things have sort of been jostled around a bit, gives us an opportunity to really reevaluate where we are, not only as a civilization, not only as a country, not only as an individual, but also just how, just to really check in with our self, our own essential nature. What's really living this life? Because we can get so caught up in the busyness of the next thing. I'm looking forward to more exciting, better, improved, happier. All of this is still it's fine to, want to, work towards, living a more comfortable life. Sure, yeah, no, that's okay. Exploring our intellect and our careers, great, wonderful. Exploring our creativity, beautiful use of this body. All the time there is something that's essential that is noticing all of that effort, all of that movement. If we're doing those things in order to gain some belief about ourselves that we think are going to make us happier when we get there, then we're denying what's possible in this moment. If we recognize what's possible in this moment, we can still do all of those things, but we're doing it from a different place. We're not doing it out of a sense of lack, sense of having to prove ourselves, sense of having to, gain other people's recognition, gain power, whatever our storyline is. We can just do it out of a sense of enjoyment. The question is, how different would this world look if everybody was living out of a sense of enjoyment rather than out of a sense of lack? I feel so inadequate about myself. I don't tell myself that, of course, but because I don't dare to look. So I feel so inadequate about myself, I have to abuse other people. I have to dominate whatever power position I happen to work my way in. I have to, aggrandize myself to the extent that hopefully maybe I'll feel good about myself. That whole movement of out of lack, trying to create some sense of worth, to sort of fill this inner void. The inner void is, it's actually a good thing, right? That sense of, something not, it's almost a sense of something not quite right. How do I fix it? If we decide to fix it through wealth and power and greed and domination over other countries or races or religions or whatever, we're just going in. It's the it's the same energy, right? It's the same energy from source. It's just been directed unwisely. Opting for cheap thrills. When that same energy, that same sense of, I'm not quite looking at things quite right because I can sense, there's a sense of separation, sense of not quite fully engaged with life. There's still, maybe some fear around life, or some hope that it'll be all okay one day. That's that same sense of, sometimes called spiritual discontent. That sense of is a good thing. It sort of motivates us. The problem is if we use that energy unwisely, it can have devastating consequences. We can read the newspapers and read all about it. But that same energy can also be sort of redirected to what is, I would suggest, most important, which is to find out, before I spend all this energy running out and exploring life and, trying to do things, it's useful to ask, well, I wonder who it is that's actually living this life. We can even do it meditating. Oh, I'm going to meditate and I'm going to, really try hard this time, and I'm really going to try not to think. But we don't ask the question, well, I wonder who's meditating. Who's that? Much better question. Because that gets to the heart of, that's the one hand we're looking out. I want the scenery to change so I feel better, so I can feel like I'm making progress. But almost the last thing we choose to do is to actually look within. We think looking within is looking at our thoughts and feelings. It's not. That's still, because consciousness can see the thoughts and feelings, it's still outside. The tree's over there, chair's here, my knee is here, my thoughts are here, all of it within the field of consciousness. So we can just turn around and say, well, I wonder what this field of consciousness is then. I wonder what that's about. I wonder if that could really be who I am. I wonder if that might be what's actually living this life. I wonder if that awareness that I can experience here is actually different than the awareness over there. Is it like 2 different awarenesses or 20 different awarenesses? Can I say that this awareness ends here, that awareness starts over there? Can I even say that it's my awareness? So that's a worthy inquiry, just to... Because when we first encounter it, it can feel personal. It can feel like, oh, I finally figured out that there's this awareness that's actually present, all the time. Every time I look, there it is. But I wonder where it originates from. It's a good inquiry, right? When we can really see that it's not personal, it's not far away either, it's not other than what we are, it's just not ours and nobody else's. It's intimately impersonal. It's awareness. Awareness functioning here, functioning there. That changes how we view the world, because we're not and we see we're not actually separate from the other person, and ultimately not separate from everything else. We see that same awareness is enlivening this body, living through this body-mind, is not other than the awareness that's living through that body-mind. So then, if that's really truly seen, what does that do to antagonism between races, between religions, between countries, between people and animals? If that's really seen, why would you hurt yourself? It changes everything. It's not like differences can't be observed. Appearances are appearances. There's immense diversity of appearances, no question. But when the recognition is that it's all appearing within this awareness, and that awareness is undifferentiated, this awareness can actually be harmed. That's where the freedom comes from. The freedom to actually live this life without fear, when we know what we essentially are is beyond harm. Body can be harmed. Our mind can be harmed. Somebody can say something nasty about us. It doesn't feel good. So we're not denying that. But all the time there's a sense of yes, and this awareness is as untainted as the day we were born. Available for the next experience, whatever existence happens to bring our way. And just coming back to that recognition is liberating, is really liberating. And we can really, nature is just this immense invitation to bring us back into that recognition of what we actually are. Existence existing in silence, aware, experiencing just this continuous unfolding of life.